the Baen Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, Dragons Made to Order, and we continue our ongoing audiobook serialization of Timothy Zahn's Cobra, all right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour. It is a pleasure to have you along. I am Baen Associate Editor and your podcast host, David Afsharirad. This week, we bring you DJ Butler's discussion with Dave Bara about Trinity's Children. The novel is a sequel to Trinity, which we discussed previously on the podcast. Trinity's Children follows the saga of Admiral Jared Clement, though now new readers should have no trouble jumping in. But first, the news. Head over to Baen.com and check out this month's free short story, Fire Breathing Dragon by Dan Cobalt, which is set in his Build-A-Dragon sequence of near-future techno-thrillers that follows researcher Noah Parker and his work at Reptilian Corp, a biotech firm that has created living, breathing dragons. There are 2 novels in the series out now, Domesticating Dragons and Deploying Dragons. Noah Parker has made a name for himself designing genetically engineered dragons for Reptilian Corp. Of course, most of his day is writing genetic code for one of the many standard model dragons that his company produces. But every now and then, he gets a crack at creating something custom for a high-paying customer. Always a challenge, these custom jobs help break up the day-to-day of his job. Hey, even creating dragons can get boring if you do it long enough. But when an order for a fire-breathing dragon crosses his desk, a heretofore unheard of request, Noah Parker will have to use all his skills to get the job done. And while you're on the site, take a look at this month's fictional nonfiction essay, Origins of the West African Launcher from the TCG Files by Andy Presby. A look at what it might take to build a space elevator to Earth orbit as seen in Joel Presby's The Bara Snake Launcher. In the novel, the race is on to build the world's first space elevator, but creating such an engineering miracle is no easy task. While the novel is not short on technical detail, we thought readers might be interested in a closer look at what it might really take to build a space elevator. And that's it for the news.
Hi, welcome. This is DJ Dave Butler. I'm here with Dave Bara to talk about his new novel. Welcome, Dave. Trinity's Children. It is out now in trade paperback and all your favorite ebook formats, DRM free when you buy them at Baen.com, of course, as always.
Right.
Dave's previous novels include the Lightship Chronicles series from Daw Books, including Impulse, Starbound, and Defiant. His other works include Void Ship, St. Cochrane's World, Speedwing, and short story contributions to various anthologies. And of course, the first book in the series we're talking about today, which was Trinity, which came out in October of last year, I guess 13 months ago. Dave grew up as a fan of the Gemini and Apollo space programs and dreamed of being an astronaut one day. Since that time, he has restricted his journeys into space to the written word. He lives in the Pacific Northwest. Dave, welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour.
Thank you, Dave. I really appreciate it. I appreciate being here, and I enjoy the time we spend together on this. So.
You know, I thought about being an astronaut as a kid too, but so I was very disappointed when so we haven't met in person, so you don't know this, but I'm quite tall. I'm 6'7".
Oh wow.
Yeah. Wow. So I crossed, let's see, I think I was in the 7th grade when I exceeded 6'2", which I don't know if this was true even and or if it's still true, but someone had told me that was like the tallest you could be to be an Air Force pilot, and therefore that was the cap on astronaut height, was 6'2". And I felt cheated. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same thing with jockeys and race car drivers too. I think they tend to be smaller on the smaller size. So it depends on how good you are. If you're really super good, you can be taller, but otherwise, I don't think so.
Yeah, I think I would have been wiped out from being a jockey in like 5th grade. I think
Yeah,
that's the point.
yeah.
That, ooh.
Yeah, sounds like it. But yeah, the astronaut thing, man, I really wanted to be an astronaut when I was a kid. And you know, we just I don't know. Life never kind of took me that way and all that stuff. It was like a childhood dream that I didn't think would ever happen. Kind of like writing. And then I kept writing, and one day I'm kind of a spacefaring guy in space and books. So it's it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's not bad.
Yeah.
So excited to be here and talk about Trinity's Children.
Right.
Which is it fair to characterize that as sort of hard science fiction? It's space adventures. Would you call it space opera? What would you describe it as?
You know, I don't know. When I write, I just write what I think to me is this the kind of science fiction I enjoy, right? So I'm not categorizing it. I know a friend of mine, a guy who wrote a review in Analog, talked about it being between space opera and between and military science fiction. I think it has elements of both of those things, but I don't think it's beholden to any one area. Is it hard science fiction? It's more hard than other stuff that I've written, but I wouldn't call myself a hard SF writer. So I have to say it's got some scientific background in it that's certainly can be talked about as being solid and all that stuff, but it's not really any one of those categories. It's a good science fiction read. If you're looking for a good science fiction book, I think it fits that category. I think it is fast and it's entertaining, and hopefully people will like it no matter which category they think it fits in. So
yeah, no, I like that.
Yeah.
In terms of I guess the reason why I would ask the question, or sort of in kind of setting the stage for the kind of science fiction this is a little bit, you know, where we're at in the setting is right at the moment at which a working Alcubierre drive makes faster than light travel possible, right? That's
right. Essentially, yes.
Yeah. And there are energy weapons, but also there are sequences involving, you know, masses of ball bearings being fired at enemy ships and stuff, right? So it has some of that kind of Firefly feel, where it's spaceships and it's ships we don't have now, but it's not warp 10 full speed ahead Mr. Sulu, dilithium crystals kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, really in this universe, in both books, we're dealing just with the 5 suns, which is a set of stars fairly close to Earth, but it's really the only human colony that has succeeded. So 500 years from now, we're basically, there's 2 star systems, Earth and the 5 suns, and they don't talk because of the distances and the time involved. And suddenly then we have the breakthrough of the Alcubierre type drive that gives them the opportunity to travel faster than light, to communicate faster than by, you know, faster than light, I guess you would say. And it just sort of, it doesn't get heavily into the technology as much as it is about the stories and the characters and how they can be played out in that scenario, those scenarios. So
yeah. So, okay, so let's explore this background a little bit. So, well, actually, so background of the let's talk about our main character. This is a story about characters and adventure. Let's talk about our main character, Jared Clement. Tell us about Jared Clement. What kind of guy is he? What's his background coming into Trinity, the original story?
Well, coming into that, he was originally just an old, well, he's not really retired, but he's a ship captain. He's a pilot. He's a guy who's worked for himself for a while, about a decade since the war ended. It was a civil war between the Rim Confederation, a group of very poor planets, against some more powerful central sort of planets. And in that time, he sort of had this record of being reliable, a record of being, a good person to do business with, but he wasn't really anymore. He was laying low, trying to downplay the history of what had happened in the war. And yet everybody kind of knew who he was. Not like General Lee, maybe, but like somebody from the South in the Civil War. There are plenty of people, I'm sure, that had those kinds of reputations after the war. And so he was kind of there hanging out, and he gets an opportunity. And that opportunity comes to him in the form of Tanitha Yan, who is an officer with the Five Sons Navy. And she makes a proposal to him that he come and listen to the commander of a distant starbase, and that she thinks he will find that opportunity irresistible. And he does, actually. And so he basically embarks on the path with these people again, the Five Sons people. He had served in their Navy. He'd become a rebel. When the revolution was defeated, he sort of became on his own, an individual pilot. And, now he's all the way back to working for the Five Sons again. So interesting bit of back and forth on how he got there, where he's going, where do his loyalties really lie. And ultimately, I think he's a guy whose loyalties lie with his family, with his friends, with the people that he loves and the world that he came from, which is poor. No question, it's poor. But he wants to help to try to solve their problems by opening up exploration to this system called Trinity, which is a red dwarf star system with 7 planets, 3 of which are habitable. And very much like the TRAPPIST-1 star system that we talked about, that's been talked about for a number of years. And that's kind of where the origin of the idea came out. And then Clement himself is just someone who's very motivated to help not only his family, but his friends. And he's very loyal to the people who have come before him. So in a lot of ways, he's kind of a hero's hero who devolves a bit into a bit of self-pity and drinking. And yet he has the edges of military training around him that still guides his life. And he still has those aspects of his life where he's able to use that stuff as his advantage over time. I actually wrote a story called Shattered Trust, which appeared on the Baen.com website. And it's actually, if you read Trinity at the beginning, there's a prequel prologue that takes place essentially at the end of the war. And then it jumps into the regular part of the novel. Well, Shattered Trust takes place between the end of the prologue and the actual beginning of the novel of Trinity. It fills in about a year and a half of time there. And in that time, you find out a little bit more about Clement, about what he's about, and the kinds of issues he's going to be facing in his own life in the future, for sure. So,
yeah. So, just to add just a hair of clarity, like that, the Rim Confederation versus the Central Planet, that's all within a single star system. That's all within the Five Sons.
Yeah. Well, the Five Sons is actually a grouping of stars that are close together. So they're all within travel times that you can live with. They're separated by maybe just a couple of light years, there's a group of these 5 stars, and in the interaction between them, there is the central sort of planets. The 2 controlling main planets are the ones that sort of control the political discourse. They're the richest planets. They're the ones that have most resources. They kind of control everything. And the Rim is kind of an out there in the distance kind of group that when they think about it now, they look at it and say, well, those planets should never have been colonized. But but they were, and now people live there, and so everyone has to deal with them and their problems as well. So
yeah. And so what are the five sons? Are they in any communication with Earth at all, or is it all sort of like I send a message and I get an answer in 20 years?
Yes, it's very much like that. Very rare. Communication is very rare with those other with Earth and the five suns. The five suns star systems each have planets. Some of them have multiple habitable planets. Some of those were terraformed, but they are able to communicate with each other better than they are able to communicate with Earth, which, like you said, takes years. Whereas the ships they have can accelerate up to light speed. I don't think I get into that too much, but they can get into accelerate at least up to light speed and get where they're going, in a fairly swift amount of time. So it's like if Alpha Centauri is being Proxima is about 4.3 light years from Earth, and let's just say in this world, it's more like they're about 2 to 2.5 light years away at the most extreme. So it's a smaller group, and it's also technologically more advanced than what we have today. So
yeah. So all right, so book one, Trinity,
Right.
Basically the five sons technologists, the Navy engineers have come up
Right.
with they've got a single ship that at least that we know about, right?
A
That,
prototype, yes.
Yeah, prototype ship that'll exceed light speed, and so Clement is sent to go, or he's recruited, right? Come back and go explore this Trinity, this nearby red dwarf system.
Right.
One of the things he does is he goes and recruits his former crew, right? So there's this kind of sense of like, if the Enterprise lost and was decommissioned, and 10 years later, Kirk kind of pulling his life together,
Right.
Goes and finds Scotty and others. So who are some of the principal members of his command team that he's recruiting? Who is around him?
Well, the people that are around him have all been people he served with. I think the main guy, the main genius, if you will, the engineer, is a man named Hassan Nabli, and he's a friend. He's a guy that cuts through the bullshit. He's a guy who will call Clement on any area where he seems like he's pushing too far or too fast. He'll tell him, hey, you can do that. I can't do this. I can't do that. I'm not a miracle worker, captain, et cetera, et cetera. So he's a main character. The others are Amika Ori, who is a pilot. Her husband, whose name is Ivan Massif, he's Russian. He's a very good navigator. So they have these skills. They also Yan, the character of Yan, ends up joining them on the first mission in Trinity, and that small group is then supplemented by some technicians and local people that were basically picked for the crew by Alara Devore, who's the main villain in the first book.
Ex-girlfriend.
So yeah. So that's the main core of people around him, and those are the people he trusts, and those are the people who he relies on to get him in and out of critical situations. And Yan is always there as the foil. She's the one who's there questioning whether what he's doing is the right thing to do or putting him in the right direction. So she's his conscience in a lot of ways, and that function, I think, is pretty important in storytelling, especially science fiction storytelling. So,
yeah. I like how you start with Hassan Nobly first. He's a key character in the first book.
mm-hmm.
One of the things that the Trinity is the name of the ship, and
right.
it's a gunship. It's not an elegant flyer. It's like it's a platform for guns is what it is,
right.
really.
Right.
Which has had this drive attached to it.
Right.
one of the things that Nobly does, and this is all book one stuff, is hey, we've got this prototype, never before seen engine. Turns out there are ways to turn this into a not very reliable, potentially self-destructive, but pretty powerful weapon. If we limit ourselves to the number of shots we take, right?
Right.
And that's kind of part of the story, the adventure, book one. You're right.
Yes.
Ilana Devore turns out to be the baddie. So actually, let's talk a little about book one then. So we go when we see Trinity. One of the things that happens is we see that it's inhabited already by humans, or
close enough to
humans, right?
Right.
Who lives on Trinity, and what's going on with them? It's what are the kind of mysteries involved?
Well, the natives that live on Trinity seem like very simple people. But as they sort of explore a bit more and interact with the natives, they discover that there's a lot of buried, if you will, buried technology. That at some point, this was a lot more highly technically advanced civilization than it is currently. And so interacting with them allows them to sort of say, hey, these people were here first, and they were unexpectedly we find them, and unexpectedly they appear to be pretty human. And that's kind of a concept I've always I've been dealing with quite a bit in my books, and that is that, what if we go out there and we find extraterrestrials, but they're extraterrestrial humans? What do we do in those situations? Or how do we deal with it? Do we have protocols? Do we think about it? What are we going to do about it? And I don't think that anybody was expecting there to be habitable planets with population of natives. So when they first discover that, it really throws off Clement. But as they discover in book two, this civilization is far more advanced than they thought it was going to be. And it ends up being a third sort of player between the what we call the Solar League, which is the Earth systems, and the Earth system, and the five suns. It becomes sort of a third player in the game, and it's interesting. And I think that they teach us a little bit about colonialism, and about how maybe maybe not all colonialism is necessarily a good thing. But what it does do is it teaches us that teaches them, Clement and the characters, that they have to consider that and the impacts of those on those people before they take any steps that could harm them. So a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, they seem, especially as we meet them in book one, they seem like it's almost like an Edenic kind of, like a very simple existence, and they seem very innocent.
Right.
That gets some real nuance in book two.
Yeah.
Like, the technologies that they're really working with.
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing is when they go there, initially in Trinity, they find a structure, like an old cave-like structure that's physically, or it's been made by someone, and they figure out, okay, so this was here before, but when was it here before? Who could have put this on this planet? And everything's kind of built to a human specification, if you will.
Yeah.
So those things open up more questions for them, and those are questions that in that book in Trinity, I decided, we need to set that aside, because I want to explore that more when I get to the second book. And that's pretty much what I do with Trinity's Children, is to explore that a lot more. We have a recurring character, which I call Mary, which is again sort of a play on the idea of Mary, Jesus's mother, and all that kind of thing. She's kind of a mother of their generation, in many ways. And so this interaction and this discovery leads them to make more choices down the road that maybe they weren't planning on when they initially arrived. And in Trinity's Children, it's more about, are we going to really take over these worlds? Are we going to colonize them? Are we going to make these people subservient to us in some ways because we know that always happens? Or are we going to work with them? And eventually they're able to sort of get through those crises and determine what the best choices are for everybody. And I think that's important.
Yeah. So, okay. So speaking of crisis, as Trinity's Children opens, Clement is visiting his parents on the farm.
Yeah.
Out in one of the rim planets, right?
Yeah, he's on Seda, which is his home world, and where his family is from, where they've been for a couple of generations. And it's a farm that's been slowly dying for a number of years. And he does try to convince them, his parents, to join them on the journey to the new worlds, to Trinity, and start over again.
Yeah. So a couple things about this. So first of all, he's not alone, right? He's visiting his parents, and who's with him and why?
Well, his mother and father, and they're with him primarily. They agree to join this exploration colony. This what's the word I used in the book? It's sort of a migration colony, if you will. And so about 30,000 people end up going from his world, Seda. It's the first transition where they're going to go to the new world on Trinity. And they're with him, and they're there. I think they constantly remind him of where he came from, what his upbringing was, what he's doing when he's making decisions. Is he making positive decisions or negative decisions for people around him? And although they don't play a deep role in the final outcome of the story, they are there when he's trying to make decisions and when he's trying to balance things out. And he realizes, okay, if I do this, how will this affect them? How will this affect the natives? How will this affect the future that I'm trying to build here? So that's the function I think that they have for him.
Yeah. What's that's a big migration. What's necessitating the mass migration of people from Seda to the Trinity worlds?
Well, the basic necessity is the fact that Seda is starving. The colony is dying. Most of the people now live just in one single city. In the center, their family lives a little bit off of that, and they still have enough food to get around, but not much. And so people are leaving at an alarming rate. And that's part of what I talked about in Trinity, is there's sort of a cascading failure event that's going on, where as the Rim Confederation worlds face catastrophe, as they die out, the people migrate to where they can get food and places to live. And so they move to the next system, but the next system isn't that strong either. So that system then gets overturned. And then they move on to the next planetary system. And when they get to there, that causes the system to be overburdened. So a lot of it's about how the populations of the Five Suns worlds are slowly being broken down. They're not resource rich. These planets are not like Earth. They do have resources, but they're not like super rich planets or anything. And so that's why when they find the Trinity worlds, which are extremely rich in resources, that's why they're so excited about the prospect of colonizing them. So the Cascade failure event is what leads them to say, okay, we can take them out of this world, out of the Rim and over to Trinity. We can stop this cascading failure event from happening, and we can save both the Five Suns civilization and build a new civilization in the Trinity worlds.
Yeah. And that puts some interesting kind of color on this whole colonization question, right? It's not a civilization idly looking to get richer. Right. It's more like, I mean, we've seen these kinds of cascading failures in history, right? And this is when the Huns come sweeping across Europe, or the Mongols, or when the first Indo-European migrations come out into Greece just before the appearance of writing, right? I mean, there's some environmental failure, and it drives people looking for a place to live because they're risk starving, right? So it's not a non-ethical question in the abstract. Should we cooperate with people in Trinity or not? It's my people need a place to live,
Right.
and they might die.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so that's kind of the background driver, and he's visiting his parents with Talitha Yan, right? Because their relationship has evolved.
Well, it evolves to the point where, I mean, he has, there are limits, right? And thankfully, let's go to Baen books and give them a nod for that. Is, they want to keep the relationships as clean as possible, and I get that. But I think that it's evolved to the point where he knows now that he relies on her almost explicitly for advice, for I guess comfort in some ways, but also for her insight. He respects her intellect, and even though he knows she's not a military minded person like him, he also knows that he can rely on her for a lot of things. So Jan is younger. He's like 45. She's probably 29 or so. So it's a good balance in terms of their experience and her youth versus his more middle-aged approach to life, if you will. And so they work together pretty fluidly, to the point where he's able to trust her to go off and do other things, take command of another ship, and sort of lead a large group of people. And he's comfortable with that because of the relationship he's developed with her. So yeah, they're together when they meet with the mom and dad, and they kind of are together, but they kind of aren't. There's lines they don't cross. They're not allowed to cross, and the Navy doesn't allow them to cross, so they don't. And that's the dynamic that goes on there.
Yep. So
now, I won't give everything away, but I will say eventually that relationship does change to what they end up both wanting at the end. So that's all I'll say.
Okay. So Clement's gonna head this second expedition to Trinity,
right?
And now we've got more than one ship, right?
Right.
That have
26 ships, I believe. My counting was all correct during the writing.
Equipped with this drive, right? And so Clement's the overall commander, and has command of the Trinity still, right? Also,
he has command of his gunship, but it's kind of stowed away in the much larger ship, which is the capital ship, which is the Agamemnon. So he's admiral of the fleet, but he's not really in command of any particular ship. Jan is the commander of the Agamemnon, and he's sort of just like I said, he's the admiral of the fleet, but he doesn't command the ship specifically. So the gunship is there when he needs it, if he needs it, but it's not something he's actively commanding on a day-to-day basis or anything like that. So
okay.
Yeah.
So this fleet has adventures before they even get to Trinity, right?
Yes, they do.
Things go wrong. What can go wrong when you're in hyperspace?
Things always go wrong when you're in hyperspace. I mean, that's the thing. What happens is they discover a secret about, now I won't call it a secret. They discover something about the drive, and that is that the drive, and I call it the LEAP drive, which was liquid energy absorption propulsion, I believe is which by the way was something I stole from the job I was working at. So, kudos to those people, but it was a good name. It wasn't called liquid energy absorption propulsion. I made that up, but the LEAP drive thing was like, I like the sound of that. Anyway, what they discover is that the drive distorts not only space, but it can also distort time. So depending on how you key in your reactor settings and how you deal with your the envelope of ships that are around inside the bubble, that can create time discrepancies. It can create problems. Whereas someone may think that they're right on schedule in their bubble, but they in fact are 6 hours, 6 days, who knows, 6 years, still away from their intended target. So they kind of posited that this was possible, but they hadn't really dealt with it on a specific basis until they get to Trinity, and the first group arrives, and then the second group arrives, but the third group doesn't arrive. And then they have to conduct a search, which is pretty exhausting. So that's all I'll say about that.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. So, book 2 here, we see the solar, the Earth forces.
Solar League, yeah.
Solar League showing up. We got kind of a hint of that at the end of book 1.
Right.
We see it more now.
Yes.
And returning with an old frenemy. Like I said, a lot of one of the sort of recurring military techniques or tactics or questions in book 1 was around Nobly's, drive weapon, right?
Yes. Right.
Can we operate it? Has enough time passed? If I fire again, is the ship going to crack?
Right.
We get into different kinds of fights here, right? Because we're pretty soon engaged fighting against the Earthlings. Talk to us about the action? Like, what do space battles look like in the Trinity book?
Well, in the Trinity books, they're different than a lot of what I've written before. In my previous stuff, it was a lot more ships, swinging by and shooting at each other. Now, you can't really do that on a full time basis. And any space battle is going to have to be conducted at less than light speed by a long, long ways. It's going to have to be conducted at very, very close quarters for the most part. And I tried to look a lot at technology like cruise missiles and things like that. What is their actual range effectively? How would they use that in space? How would I be able to translate that to kind of technology in space, things like that? So, throughout the battles, I have a variety of different tactics and things. There are mines, which I call scatter mines, which they sort of throw into the battlefield. Those mines are magnetic. They're dragged along by a single ship. In this case, I think it is the Beauregard. And that technology plays into, I don't know if you can see that, I hope you can. That technology plays into how the battles are carried out. And the thing about having an all powerful weapon, right, that they used in the first book. And the second book is these ships are really close together, and you can't just go around blazing the entire star system with your weapon, because you might, who knows what you might hit or how you might hit it or how you might destroy what you might destroy. And so you got to kind of pare that down. I wanted to make the battles a little bit more personal. I still got back into Clement using his ability tactically, his ability to break up larger fleets, and he's pretty successful at that. He's pretty successful at dealing with enemy tactics, because he still has some superior, even though he may have inferior speed, he has superior firepower. If he has inferior firepower, he may have a speed or a nimbleness sort of advantage. So he uses a lot of that stuff as much as he can to try to keep the battle, basically keep the enemy forces at bay for as long as he can before he's forced to make some serious decisions about how they're going to carry on the battle or not. So
Yeah. It's interesting to see some of the change in dynamic, right? Like within a single ship, you as the captain you have issues around sort of chain of command and persuasion and getting everyone on your side. And we saw that in book one.
right.
Of course, you have that, if anything, it's a bigger issue when you're commanding a fleet of 26 ships.
Right.
But also you have this dynamic where you send ships to do things with, some of them are higher risk, right? You
Yes.
send ships to take missions where the odds are terrible. So there's this interesting dynamics around Clement as a leader, above and beyond what we saw last time.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely has to think about putting ships in harm's way. And there's a sequence in the book when they first arrive in the star system that definitely he has to put at least one ship, if not more, in harm's way. But he's also willing to take those risks for himself, which is why he ends up, and I'll give this away, it's a little spoiler in Trinity's Children. He does end up back in command of his original gunship, and he has to end up using it in a way, well, let's just say he has to make a bit of a sacrifice. And in doing that, he suffers a lot, personal loss and things that happen to him and to people he loves. So, yeah, it's difficult, but he's not afraid to ask people to do difficult things because he's willing to do those things himself as well. So, yeah.
So okay, we got several exciting space action sequences. We also have action on the planet.
Yes.
And some of it, I will say, is a little kind of cyberpunk. Speaking around kind of genre, get into some kind of cyberpunk type issues. And we meet Mary, and we knew Mary is basically this kind of innocent, non-Earth human.
Let's call her what she is. She's a nymphet. We'll just call her a nymphet.
She's a nymphet. Yes, yes, that is true. So
in the first one.
In the first one. So things change though. What do you want to tell us about what happens on the planet here in book 2?
Well, when they get there, when Clement gets to the planet and they start dealing with starting their colonization process, he does encounter Mary again, and she's a very different person than the young girl that he left about 2 years before. And she has been transformed. And it is a cyberpunky kind of turn, if you will, where she's been enhanced, or she was born enhanced, and she's sort of been activated to serve a purpose. And that purpose is to run a lot of the systems around the planet itself, around the Trinity planets. And he finds his interactions with her changed completely from looking at her as a very slight character, sort of waif-like in a lot of ways. Now she's very authoritative. She's got a lot of knowledge. She's sort of been, in many ways, she's been activated. And because of that, he has to deal with her on a much more level playing field than he did when he originally knew her the first time. So the cyberpunky aspects, those are things that I think, it enhance the story. I was trying to really get the line between stuff that was both magical and yet horrific. And I tried to find that balance. I hope I did. But a lot of times the choices that people make, especially Mary, the choices she has to make are as difficult or worse than any choice that Clement or anyone else has to make. So there's a lot of technology running around. It's kind of been running on automatic for a long time, and they start activating it. And when they start activating it and Mary starts getting involved, it creates a lot of consequences, but it's also necessary to tell the story and to defend these three worlds from the rest of the galaxy. And I think, one of the things I keyed on just a little bit, but haven't really, I've kind of held it back for maybe another adventure in this series, and that is that the race that kind of populated those worlds initially, they did give people, well, let's just say they sort of created worlds that would be habitable for the human form. And there's a lot of that in there. And how do we do that? How do we deal with it? And yeah, I can get into that more. If I get a chance in the third book, we'll get into it more in detail. But it is something that's kind of underlying it. There is this technology, but it's not without risk. It's not without a price, and there is a price to be paid. And yeah, it's a hard choice. It's hard choices.
Yeah, hard choices, and we end up in a sort of a Star Wars like dual ending action sequence, right? Where on the one hand, there's people on the planet and finally getting inside some of these mysterious spaces and strange transformations, like you say, sort of cyberpunky borderline horror, maybe, right?
Right.
In terms of kind of their impact on Clement and others. But while the fight is still going on between ships above, so very, very exciting. What a fun big action ending.
Yeah, I liked it. I like the ending. Well, not everybody ends up with a happy ending, but it ends up pretty good.
Yeah. So, is there anything else that you'd like to say about Trinity's Children that you haven't? Is there anything you want to talk about that I haven't asked you about?
Well, the only thing I can say is it definitely follows on from the first book, but we do see Clement and a lot of the other characters further on down the line. And yes, there are some old enemies that come back. And I think the growth through there is basically the fact that Clement has much greater responsibility when the story starts, which he doesn't think is going to be an issue. He thinks it's going to be kind of a cruise. We're going to go on a cruise with 30,000 people. We're going to land them on this planet, and we're going to start going. And within a couple months, we'll have another 30,000 and then another and another. And he thinks it's going to be pretty easy. But that's not how it turns out, of course. And, I think the main thing is that at the end, when he makes his sort of final decisions on where he wants to be and what he wants to do, I think he's much happier with the final choices that he makes than with many of the choices he made along the way.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, can you tell us what you're working on now? What do we expect to see coming up from Dave Bara?
Well, what I have right now on my desk is a desktop, right? If I point right here, I can touch it right there. I've got a draft of a novel called Mercy that is in a completely different world. It's based on a science fiction telling of a story that would involve, if you remember back in the COVID days, a couple of years ago, there were two ships, USNS Mercy and USNS, I can't remember what the name of the second one was, but they're basically hospital ships. Mm-hmm. And I kind of always wanted to do a story about a hospital ship. And so in that universe, there is the possibility humans are really good at two things: at fighting and at healing people. So they're really good doctors and really good warriors. So that story is one. It does involve aliens for the first time, and I get into that, and I think that's really a lot of fun. There's a lot going on. It's still developing, still forming in my mind. So that's kind of what I'm working on now. Earlier this year, I wrote Shattered Trust. I wrote the ending of this book earlier this year as well. So, that's kind of what I'm looking at right now. I'm also, I got some stuff going on in my life with with a girl I might get married to and things like that. So that's kind of exciting for the third time. So those are the kind of things I'm working on. But Mercy is out there. It's coming. I work on it. I'm what I call dabbling in it right now. So dabbling involves working on it, every once a week, couple times a week. It's not really heavy duty writing yet, but the story's still growing. I love the story, and I think it's going to be a good one. So hopefully everything will continue to evolve as my career continues to evolve. That would be great.
Yeah, well, I look forward to seeing it, David.
All right. Thanks, Dave.
All right. Well, once again, the book is Trinity's Children, out now from Baen Books and trade paperback and an ebook. Dave, Bara, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
All right. Thank you, Dave Butler, and you keep going too, man. See you soon.
And now we bring you Timothy Zahn's Cobra. Earth's only hope was the Cobras. The colony worlds Adirondack and Silvern fell to the Troft forces almost without a struggle. Outnumbered and on the defensive, Earth made a desperate decision. It would attack the aliens not from space, but on the ground, with forces the Trofts did not even suspect. Thus were created the Cobras, a guerrilla force whose weapons were surgically implanted, invisible to the unsuspecting eye, yet undeniably deadly. But power brings temptation, and not all the Cobras could be trusted to fight for Earth alone. Johnny Moreau would learn the uses and abuses of his special abilities and what it truly meant to be a Cobra.
The interviews the next morning were complete washouts, with the two prospective employers clearly seeing him just out of politeness. Gritting his teeth, Johnny returned home and called up the news sheet once again. He lowered his sights somewhat this time, and his new list came out to be 3.5 pages long. Doggedly, he began making the calls. By the time Jamie came to bring him to dinner, he had exhausted all the numbers on the list. Not even any interviews this time, he told Jamie disgustedly as they walked into the dining room where the others were waiting. News really does travel in this town, doesn't it? Come on, Johnny, there has to be someone around who doesn't care that you're an ex-Cobra, Jamie said. Perhaps you should lower your standards a bit, Pierce suggested. Working as a laborer wouldn't hurt you any.
Or maybe you could be a patroller, Gwen spoke up. That would be neat.
Johnny shook his head. I've tried being a laborer, remember? The men on the road crew were either afraid of me or thought I was trying to show them up.
But once they got to know you, things would be different,
Irena said. Or maybe if they had a better idea of what you'd done for the Dominion, they'd respect you more, Pierce added. No, Dadder. Johnny had tried explaining to his father why he didn't want Cedar Lake to honor him publicly, and the elder Moreau had listened and said he understood, but Johnny doubted that he really did, and Pierce clearly hadn't given up trying to change his son's mind. I probably would be a good patroller, Gwen, he added to his sister, but I think it would remind me too much of some of the things I had to do in the Army.
Well then, maybe you should go back to school,
Irena suggested. No, Johnny snapped with a sudden flash of anger. A stunned silence filled the room. Inhaling deeply, Johnny forced himself to calm down. Look, I know you're all trying to be helpful, and I appreciate it. But I'm 24 years old now and capable of handling my own problems. Abruptly, he put down his fork and stood up. I'm not hungry. I think I'll go out for a while. Minutes later, he was driving down the street, wondering what he should do. There was a brand new pleasure center in town, he knew, but he wasn't in the mood for large groups of people. He mentally ran through a list of old friends, but that was just for practice. He knew where he really wanted to go. Jamie had suggested he call Elise Karn before dropping in on her, but Johnny was in a perverse mood. Turning at the next corner, he headed for Blakely Street. Elise seemed surprised when he announced himself over her apartment building's security intercom, but she was all smiles as she opened her door.
Johnny, it's good to see you, she said, holding out her hand.
Hi, Elise. He smiled back, taking her hand and stepping into her apartment, closing the door behind him. I was afraid you'd forgotten about me while I was gone. Her eyes glowed. Not likely, she murmured, and suddenly she was in his arms. After a long minute, she gently pulled away. Why don't we sit down, she suggested. We've got 3 years to catch up on. Anything wrong? He asked her. No, why? You seem a little nervous. I thought you might have a date. She flushed. Not tonight. I guess you know I've been seeing Dawn. Yes. How serious is it, Elise? I deserve to know. I like him, she said, shrugging uncomfortably. I suppose in a way I was trying to insulate myself from pain in case you didn't come back. Johnny nodded, understanding. I got a lot of that on Adirondack, too, mostly from whichever civilian family I was living with at the time. Elise seemed to wince a bit. I'm sorry. Anyway, it's grown more than I expected it to, and now that you're back... Her voice trailed off. You don't have to make any decisions tonight, Johnny said after a moment, except whether or not you'll spend the evening with me. Some of the tension left her face. That one's easy. Have you eaten yet, or shall I just make us some cave? They talked until nearly midnight, and when Johnny finally left, he had recaptured the contentment he'd felt on first arriving at Cedar Lake. Doan Etheridge would soon fade back into the woodwork, he was sure, and with Elise and his family back in their old accustomed places, he would finally have a universe he knew how to deal with. His mind was busy with plans for the future as he let himself into the Moreau house and tiptoed to his bedroom. Johnny? A whisper came from across the room. You okay? Fine, Jamie. Just great, Johnny whispered back. How was Elise? Johnny chuckled. Go to sleep, Jamie. That's nice. Good night, Johnny. One by one, the great plans crumbled. With agonizing regularity, employers kept turning Johnny down, and he was eventually forced into a succession of the level 9 and 10 manual jobs he had hoped so desperately to avoid. None of the jobs lasted very long. The resentment and fear of his fellow workers invariably generated an atmosphere of sullen animosity, which Johnny found hard to take for more than a few days at a time. As his search for permanent employment faltered, so did his relationship with Elise. She remained friendly and willing to spend time with him, but there was a distance between them that hadn't existed before the war. To make matters worse, Doan refused to withdraw gracefully from the field and aggressively competed with him for Elise's time and attention. But worst of all, from Johnny's point of view, was the unexpected trouble his problems had brought upon the rest of the family. His parents and Jamie, he knew, could stand the glances, whispered comments, and mild stigma that seemed to go with being related to an ex-Cobra. But it hurt him terribly to watch Gwen retreat into herself from the half-unintentional cruelty of her peers. More than once, Johnny considered leaving Horizon and returning to active service, freeing his family from the crossfire he had put them into. But to leave now would be to admit defeat, and that was something he couldn't bring himself to do. And so matters precariously stood for 3 months, until the night of the accident. Or the murder, as some called it.
That was another installment in Timothy Zahn's Cobra, and that's it for the podcast. Thanks as always to Audible.com and podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. Praise, thanks, and gratitude to Dave Bara for sitting down with us today, and good night, Tony Daniel, wherever you are. This is David F. Shirerod coming to you from a soundproof bunker somewhere deep in the heart of Texas. Join us here next week at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.